Okay, everybody, are we ready for the next panel discussion here on stage? Everybody, if you could sit down, please. もしよかったら皆さんね、お座りになって、次のセッションに始まりたいと思いますので、お席についていただけますでしょうか？お願いいたします。Can you all sit down? Now, our next theme is what motivates social entrepreneurs, the psychology behind founding and growing an impact startup. Joining us today for this session are our moderator, Koshu Kunii, and our speakers, Alex Zapesochny and Mariko McTier. Let's welcome the three of them on stage. お願いします. Please come up. Thank you so much. Now, a moderator, Koshu Kunii, is a general partner at Lifetime Ventures who has invested in fintech startups in emerging markets globally with organizations including the World Bank Group. And Alex Zapesochny, he's been out second time today. Thank you very much. A co-founder and CEO of Clerio Vision, and Mariko McTier is an award-winning entrepreneur who co-founded Social Innovation Japan and MyMizu. All right, so Alex, would you like to take it away from here? Oh. Okay. ではお願いします。
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to kick right off with the origin story or the initial motivation. We were actually speaking backstage, and it was quite interesting to hear that actually both of you have a background in areas that are completely different. So started with policy and legal, also at the embassy, and even journalism. What was that turning point to then say that you want to start a company?
Sure. So I think that when you speak to somebody who started something that has a social impact, oftentimes you almost kind of go down to, or can go down to their childhood. So for me, I'm quite sure actually that my childhood experiences were really instrumental in eventually wanting to be an impact entrepreneur. In my case, I was born in the Soviet Union and was raised there for the first 7 years of my life. We were very lucky to have managed as political refugees to leave the Soviet Union, come to the United States. My family stories, like with many other Soviet immigrants, have a lot of horrific elements to it. My father, for instance, was born in Siberia because each of his parents had been imprisoned for many, many years for things they didn't do. And so when you grow up like that and suddenly have an opportunity that your ancestors or very recent ancestors didn't, I wanted to do something that was going to be meaningful. I was thinking quite a bit from even an early age that given the things that my parents and grandparents had lived through, that I wanted to make sure also that fear didn't stop me. And so entrepreneurship and taking risks was something I thought about for quite a bit as a child even. But it took many false starts or many other experiences before I actually realized that entrepreneurship would be the thing that really made sense for me. Initially, I thought that politics was the thing that I was going to do, so I went to law school. And after that, I worked for an American politician and a political campaign. Then I became a prosecutor in New York City doing criminal trials. And it wasn't really until some friends of mine started a startup and I decided to become part of it that I really, for the first time, started understanding the power that a startup can have to create change for the better.
Thanks, Alex. I resonate with so much of what you shared. And I feel like when I was younger, I used to envy my friends who were like, I'm going to be a doctor, or I'm going to do this and that. And they had such a clear vision of, the profession they wanted to go into. And I never had that kind of, I want to be this kind of, but my parents are musicians and I knew I didn't want to be a musician, but that was about it.
My father, by the way, was a musician, or is a musician. He's a violinist.
I still love music, but for me also, I found myself kind of experimenting with different things. I initially started after graduating from university as a journalist. My mom will tell you from a young age, I think I've had a very strong sense of justice and wanting to make a better world. Like I love the natural world and I do have this sense of justice, but journalism was a really interesting path for me because it gave me, I used to work in an international bureau, so every day was different kind of news, and it would be like the Eurozone is falling apart, or there's a Middle East crisis going on in the Middle East, and I love that as a way of just understanding what's happening in the world and how are these things connected, such complex problems. I then transitioned into work. I used to work for the British Embassy actually here in Tokyo, working with startups. And it was the same thing kind of when I was in journalism, but it was amazing to connect the dots and to understand everything that was happening. But there was a part of me was like, I want to be part of solving that. Like, it's one thing to communicate and to share what's happening, but there was always a little part of me that was like, maybe I could be a bit more active in doing something, not just reporting on the problems in the world, but actually doing something about it. And then when I started to work with startups, it was so inspiring for me because I would, meet these founders who were raising money. They were like building a business, but they had a really strong social mission at their core. And they were like, you know what, this doesn't have to be like this. We can do something about it. And so Alex, to your point, I was like, oh, this is a way that like I can actually contribute to solving some of these problems in the world and maybe get a step closer to like an ideal world that I would like to live in. So for me, that was my journey where eventually I was like, I'm going to do something about it. Yeah, take a different step.
Beautiful. I feel like, so you both share this starting point of wanting to do something good for the society, or at least to bring justice to the world. And I'm assuming that at least most of us in the audience, including myself in the audience, do want to do some good to the world. But at the same time, what exactly do we do is a question that we oftentimes feel like cannot solve right away. For those who don't have a clear mission yet, what are the practical tips that you can give for them today so that they can at least try to see which mission for them to pursue? And one caveat to this is, another angle to this is oftentimes we want to do something good for the world, but at the same time, the subject in this sentence is I want to do something. So how do we separate this ego-driven, let's do something good because I believe this is good for the world, as opposed to what the world actually needs?
Good question. Do you want to go first, or?
Oh, you want me to start?
No,
sure. It is actually there's several good questions in there. So let me start off maybe with the last piece of it, because I think that it's really important for any founder, especially though a social impact founder, to really think about why do they want to be the founder or perhaps a founder. And the reason for that, and part of kind of why this panel made sense for me is because at one point a number of years ago, I was doing a master's in social innovation at Cambridge, and actually I wrote my dissertation on the notion of why is it, or what is it that motivates particularly social entrepreneurs to go and create whatever it is that they created. And my theory at that point was that unfortunately, sometimes it's motivated a little too much by ego. Now, don't get me wrong, ego is actually really important because the whole starting point of being an entrepreneur is the belief that there's something out there that nobody in the world, or largely nobody in the world, is addressing, and you're able to do it differently and better, and in fact, so much better that you're going to get a lot of other people to follow you. And that takes some healthy ego to do it. But the problem is that if you're too much driven by ego, in other words, if your ego doesn't allow you to see, for instance, that there are perhaps already good things happening, perhaps there are already good organizations out there, are you necessarily doing something good by saying, I will start the 7th organization that's tackling a particular problem, and therefore potentially dilute actually the solution that you're trying to put out there? Because oftentimes it actually makes a great deal of sense, perhaps, to figure out really what you're good at, what your role is. Sometimes it may not necessarily be the CEO. Sometimes it could be some other role. And perhaps if you were to do that, to find your tribe and work to solve a problem with them, not necessarily being the one out front, perhaps you can actually do a lot more good for the world. And so to me, a large portion of kind of the answer to your first question is, it's really important for people who are thinking of starting something to really understand two things. One, what is really their motivation? And then secondly, what is really their skill set? And oftentimes you can't quite figure out what your skill set is until you jump in to the difficult, humility-inducing work of actually joining sometimes other people's organizations, joining efforts, trying to start something. Oftentimes we kind of don't think necessarily of entrepreneurship as something you can practice, but from my perspective, you need to find a way to kind of jump in. Forget about the financial rewards sometimes, forget about who's out front, but literally find a way to contribute to worthy endeavors which are doing difficult things, because through that actual effort and work, oftentimes you find out a lot of things about yourself which leads you to that optimal path of what you should really be doing down the road.
Thanks, Alex. I feel you've very eloquently sort of pulled a lot of things that were in my head floating around. So I think my story kind of overlaps a lot with what you said, in that, I never, well, we were just talking about this beforehand, actually. I didn't think I would be an entrepreneur. So it wasn't I set out being like, I want to start something new. It does turn out that it was one of the options I was thinking about when I was a lot younger, but I'd forgotten about that. But whilst I do think this world could do with a lot more impact on entrepreneurs, I also think it'd be complete chaos if everyone became an entrepreneur. Like, there's a saying like entrepreneurs and the leader is so important, but who's more important? The follower, the first person who goes behind that initial entrepreneurial leader and says, what you're doing is great, let's make it happen. And so, as a society, we need all sorts of people. We need leaders and we need followers, and we need leaders who are followers, if that makes sense. And so for me personally, it was, I spent a lot of time feeling frustrated that I hadn't found exactly what it was that I felt like I was using my skill set to be effective. And I tried different jobs. I also, to your point, Alex, about learning about entrepreneurship, I joined an NGO part-time when I was working full-time somewhere else, just to understand how this small organization could work. And they were doing awesome work, and I was like, maybe I can learn something from working with them. And so for me personally, I actually kind of shuffled out of the door of a full-time job where I found it a bit scary to just jump head on into starting my own business. So I went part-time and then started something else. And that whole journey not only gave me a little bit of stability through it, but it also helped me to understand more about myself. What am I good at? What am I not good at? My partner is also my co-founder, and I realized that I couldn't do this by myself. One of the key things really about starting your own business is you can't wait for perfect. You can't wait till you have the perfect idea. You have to take action. I was really bad at that, so bad. And I'm such a perfectionist at heart, so I would always be like, let me think about it a little bit more. And so to have a partner who was like, no, let's just put it out in the world and see what happens and get some feedback. And I needed that, but I found that out through experimenting and trying different things. So I feel like for me, it was a process of experimentation, really prototyping my life, testing different jobs, testing different ways of working, and realizing that, maybe this entrepreneurship thing could work for me, but there's a few caveats. Maybe I need a co-founder. Maybe I need, I want to be operating at this scale. And, I'm still prototyping. I'm still learning.
Very nice. So need for healthy dose of ego, and need for great followers as well. I'd like to double click on this intersection. So working with several founders and entrepreneurs, you obviously need some level of ego to at least make sure that the status quo is to a certain level disrupted. And in order to do that, obviously it is extremely difficult to do it alone. I still think we're quite far away from that solo person unicorn thing. Sorry for those who are perhaps dreaming about this. Now, in order for any form of movement, any form of positive change to be brought to the world, you need that mass, critical mass, however number that is. It could be just a small team of 5 to hundreds, thousands. But the core of it, as a leader, as a founder, as an entrepreneur, you do need to be able to attract those potentially early hires, investors, customers, suppliers, any form of partners. And this ability to attract other people, I actually don't think it's a number of followers on social media. So it is not about whether you are generally liked. So likability doesn't apply here. But it's more that are you actually loved enough, not in a romantic sense, but for these other people to actually commit their significant resources to you and to your project. In my mind, I call this lovability, but at least the founders and entrepreneurs need to be lovable, not only likable, to a certain level. What do you, as individuals, Mariko and Alex, do to make sure that you are able to attract people that are needed for your company to operate well? Go
first. Yeah, that's interesting concept of lovability. I think for us, even in this room, I feel like I'm indebted to numerous people who have worked with us and helped us from very early days, and so they may have something to say on this. But I feel like, honestly, enabling people to be part of your work and co-create with you. We were speaking about co-creation the other day, but to your point, like there's no way you can succeed as an individual, as like a sole person. Like, yeah, it's just, you can't have the level of impact that you want if you're just trying to do everything yourself. So to be able to build a team of collaborators, of partners who can bring their expertise, who can bring their kind of love for whatever they're doing, and invite them to build something with you, I think is incredibly powerful. And I feel like, we have run a refill platform, an app called MyMizu, where it's all about crowdsourced information and co-creation. So we work with local governments across Japan. We work with big companies. We currently have, I think they're pitching right now actually, but like a collaboration with a blockchain company, a company in NGO in Thailand that's taking ocean plastic out of the oceans for every refill you check in the MyMizu app, so do check it out. And also Waterdrop, which is this really cool startup in Austria that's doing flavored water. And again, like they're such different companies, but they all have a role. We, including us, we all play a different role in like making this collaboration work. So I think it's really, for us, it's been about, what do we need? Which players do we need in order to make something happen? And sometimes it's something that we haven't even thought about, and someone comes to us and say, hey, I think you could do this, and I can help you to do that. And to have the space and the opportunity to co-create with people, I feel has been really important. And it's definitely not like a top-down thing. It's like, I think Audrey was saying something very similar to this earlier about, having unfinished questions, and just having the confidence to leave an unfinished question out there is an invitation for someone else to finish it. So trying to be like, we don't have the perfect product, we don't have the perfect solution. Come with us, come and work with us to make it happen. And I feel like that's been very important. I'm curious.
So I'll actually start with one piece of something you also picked up on, which is the solo entrepreneur versus teams. Because I do think that in many ways, when I've heard about venture capitalists that almost exclusively do not put money into kind of solo entrepreneurs, my own personal experience, I think corroborates that. That it's not that sometimes there are all sorts of rare things that happen, but as a likelihood, it seems much more likely that just given how difficult it is to do something that's really going to change the industry or society, that the idea that one person will have the be able to see everything minus the blind spots and also have the grit and determination to do all that for several years seems much less likely to me. But what's also interesting about the co-founder model is, especially as an investor or maybe as an early employee, it gives you a pretty good idea about what that individual, how lovable and how compelling that individual potentially is. Because in many ways, what you can judge people by is when they started essentially from nothing but a story and a plan and a hope and a set of projections, were they still, even with that little, able to communicate that vision to enough really qualified people that have a lot to lose, that have an opportunity cost, that if they don't join this, maybe they're going to leave a profession. The point is people have other things to do. Were they able to do it well enough that they were able to put before you 2, 3, or perhaps more co-founders that really make sense and that together are really going to be able to tackle a big problem. In terms of specifically the lovability part of it, I actually do think that part of the lovability for an entrepreneur is not only being lovable, meaning not only being an idealist, not only talking about kind of the grand vision, because a grand vision is not actually ultimately going to solve any big problem. You still need to be a really good business person. You need to know the numbers. You need to know the projections. You need to know the details behind those projections. You need to have been able to have thought through many different obstacles that will get in your way and have thoughtful answers. And so in some ways, I think being lovable isn't just about, are you somebody that, obviously it's important to be able to stand behind your word. It's important to be truthful and transparent and to be autonomous when you're dealing with people and give them the ability to rise and do things independently. But I think the other big part of it is, do you actually know the details of a business, and have you thought it through in a way that allows them to really trust that they are putting their themselves, their career, their time into something worthwhile and into somebody that's going to really understand how to optimize the likelihood of success.
Beautiful. I'm glad you didn't use the word passion or have this mission. So co-creation and actual delivery and actual intelligence. I'd like to shift the tone a little bit to not necessarily negative, but more realistic tone. So the foundation of the need for a team and co-founder is really that the entrepreneurial journey is such a series of ups and downs that there will be a constant ups and downs. So the downs are essentially guaranteed. And very unfortunately, we'd like to achieve the mission, but we still have to face the both external and internal pressure. Internal pressure meaning fear and potential perception of failure. And external pressure meaning fundraising, need for growth, stakeholder engagement, etc. What is one framework that you guys use to make sure that even in the downs, that you can still cope with and you can still focus on the mission, either internal or external pressure?
Thank you. Yeah, it's such an important point, and I feel like often when you start talking about like having a social mission, it's so easy to try and make that happen at all costs and forget that you have a business to make work as well, but equally to be on the other end. And we don't have any VC investment, for example, but I've spoken to multiple friends who are like struggling to think like, how do we speak to our VCs to ensure that we're protecting the impact that we want to have in the world, and not just focus on growth at all costs or whatever it is. So, and obviously that depends on the VCs you're working with. For us, it really has come down to really being clear on like what is important to us as an organization when it's down to both impact and values. So, we need to make it work as a business, but we also have values that we want to align with when we're working, and we also have an impact that we're trying to create. So every decision we make, whether it's like what projects we take on, what new business we might start, we are looking at those factors when we make those decisions. So, for example, in the past, we had a big project that came through from a tobacco company, and it would have been a great thing for us revenue-wise to be working on. But, we sat down as a team and like, does this help us to get closer to our mission, our goal? And B, does this align with our values? And the answer was no on both counts. And so it's like, okay, so it could really help us on the revenue front, but I don't know if we're going to be happy working on this as a team. And also, to be beholden to something just because you feel like you're doing it for financial reasons, didn't feel like a healthy place to be. But then it also, opened up the space for us to be working on stuff that was more aligned and help us to get to, the goals that we had at the time. So for us, it's being very conscious about, yes, sometimes we have to make sure that we're doing work that pays the bills, but it's not just for that sake. Like, what is important for us and having those factors as we're making those decisions. But Alex, I'm very curious to see how you do this at a different level.
I mean, I think as a starting point, it's really important to understand, first of all, what a typical startup journey is. Because I think for a lot of people who are having all sorts of anxiety and issues dealing with the ups and downs, it's because they may have bought into some myths about how entrepreneurship really works. And I think we all know, and I think most people who've run an organization long enough know, that it's very, very typical that whatever your plan A was isn't what ends up being implemented. That sometimes it's not even plan B or plan C or plan D. But up until not that long ago, it wasn't necessarily clear to people, including investors and VCs. They thought it was a sign of, oh, you must be the wrong person if your initial projections somehow of how you were going to execute this plan doesn't turn out to be the reality. I think it's also important for people to recognize that essentially the world of being an entrepreneur is that you are constantly dealing with too few resources. You're constantly running into people that, even though you're doing something important, then you expect that everybody should naturally care about what you're doing because it's important and it's saving the world, et cetera, that still you're running into a lot of apathy. You're running into a lot of people that gave you money and maybe were doing so with smiles initially, but those smiles go away when some sort of setback is happening. And I think if you know that that's what you're expecting, that every day, every week, you're dealing with things that have potentially existential consequences because what you're dealing with is still so fragile. In some ways, just that knowledge is it really is power in this case, because this way maybe you're not thinking, oh, you're not necessarily looking at everybody else and saying everybody else seems to have said what they're going to do and then they achieved it. That is actually very rarely the case. And most people who deal with entrepreneurship have a lot of setbacks. Sometimes they need some quiet me time because they know that every expression on their face means something to the employees, and they just need to kind of run off and try to kind of deal with a little bit of re-energizing themselves. People go through imposter syndrome. I think it's important for people to know what other entrepreneurs go through. There's a book that was written that probably most people know a few years ago called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And I think in many ways that book was very useful to people because just like a book called Getting to Plan B was about 15 years earlier, because not everybody actually understood how not straightforward the entrepreneurial journey is. So I think that's an important part. But in terms of maybe the positive side of this, this actually came from an American TV show, but I think it summarizes things pretty well. I also think that it's important every day for people to kind of integrate their own day, their own psychology, think about how they could have done better. And what this TV show once summarized, it was actually Breaking Bad for anybody who watches American television. You had kind of one meth king talking to a person who was a very, very early on in building a methamphetamine empire. And the one who was trying to learn said, how can you kind of teach me about how to do better? And the more experienced methamphetamine king said, never make the same mistake twice. And I think psychologically, I think that's very helpful because everyone makes mistakes. Nobody goes through this journey without not even just making a few mistakes, but making a lot of mistakes. And at the very least, being able to do better on so many categories throughout their day and their week. So I think the healthy psychological thing is to be aware of it and just to think through as best as you can how you can do better the next time.
Thank you. It's very interesting on the projection and the actual performance. I've probably seen hundreds of financial projections around startup. I have yet to see any startup that actually has achieved exactly as the financially projected. If you have come across any, please do let me know, because they should be in another kind of business. I'll get back on the Breaking Bad point later, but I do want to double down on sticking to the value. A lot of startups or even large corporates have this set of values that someone someday has decided and has hung on the wall. I actually find that rather distracting, meaning to say that value or the actual demonstration of value is actually through action, not through self-reported values. So how did you, in your conversation with the tobacco company or any other potential conflict of interest, so interest between the impact and financial return, how did you actually use the action-based value to determine which path was the one for Maimizu or not?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I mean, actually, to take one step back, I'd say that the values were also very like co-created with our team. So they were kind of, a lot of them, I think, came from us as leaders naturally. But it was kind of, I guess we've naturally brought together people who share those values. And we're small enough that I think that's quite manageable to maintain active values in the team. And we've come back to them and reviewed them at multiple times when we've thought, you know, is this the right thing? Are these the right values to be working with? But yeah, I mean, we don't do it as much as I'd like, but honestly, we try and integrate those values into like the big decisions that we're making as a habit. And so it is like, you know, if we were to take on this project, would we be... you know, one of our values is to think big, but to act small. So like to take those to your point earlier, to like, you know, you want a big vision, but you also have to have the practical, like pragmatic approach to like make things happen. Actually, that's a bad value to have brought out for this example, but that's, you know, we would just basically go through them and say like, does this apply? Like, how do we feel? Like, does this feel aligned? And the answer was no. And that was both in terms of like the process of working with that particular company, but also in terms of the ultimate impact that we would have. Like, how would that align with this? And it wouldn't. That was the result. So I feel like this is not a particularly insightful response, but it really was just a matter of going through them and being like, how does this align? Does it? No. Okay, cool. Let's not do it. And on the flip side of that was like, okay, then we're going to have a hole in our budget and we're going to have to figure out something else to do. So like, it's, you know, it's not all, you know, high in the sky, like, okay, great, we're living in line with our values. This is great. Like, we have to make it work. But yeah, that was a process that we followed. Yeah.
Very, very impressive.
But I think to your point, it is we've had to try very consciously to make sure it isn't just something that's like put on a wall or like put in a doc somewhere and forgotten about, like to keep them alive and to make sure that we are taking, whether it's the big decisions or like day-to-day actions. Like we've had times where we've had to come together as a team and be like, one of our values is respect. The way we're all coming late to meetings does not feel like we're respecting each other's time. Is this still important to us? Yes. Okay, cool. Well, let's like shift how we work as a team. And so not just for the big decisions, but like how do we operate on a day-to-day? And I think that's really helping us to feel like we're on the same page.
Interesting. So using value filter for any major decisions made, but also having concrete definitions of what it actually means to have that value. I would actually love to try that at our fund. So I'll report how it goes. On the self-reflection piece that you mentioned earlier, self-reflection and growth, so never make the same mistake twice. On an individual basis, I'm absolutely with you. If any, I can even see the difference between those who have the competence or the ability to get a particular professional task done today with low learning rate versus those who have rather low current competence, but with high learning rate. I would always prefer to go for those, except for very, very niche, high expertise needed deep tech area. At the same time, actually, I have two questions on this. How do we make sure that we're actually drawing the real learning, not superficial learning? As an example, this company didn't go well. This real estate massive company, we should avoid him, or we should avoid his the school he went to, or the nationality. So these are superficial feature-based learning that I actually don't think should apply. But what exactly is the real learning here, and how can we apply that for the future? So the difference between the superficial and real learning, I feel like it's we get that quite wrong oftentimes. This customer did not want to renew our contract. Let's not work with this industry, for instance. So how do we draw the real learning? And secondly, we don't know what we don't know. Meaning to say, a lot of us actually do make the same mistake more than twice. On a collective basis, as a humanity, I feel like we make the same mistake over and over again. So how do we make sure that the unknowns to us are made known so that we are at least self-aware on the problems that we have?
Yeah, all right. I'm not going to use Breaking Bad analogies anymore if I if I have to follow them up like that. But okay, so I think that there's a lot obviously to your question. I've always essentially believed that in many ways the height of entrepreneurial wisdom is figuring out this very nuanced way to figure out when you should take external feedback and actually listen to it, right? The whole like pivot thing, versus taking in external feedback and realizing that maybe the feedback they're not quite your audience, they don't quite get what it is you're saying, and that's really hard. And so for me, when I hear, for instance, that venture capitalists want to find people who are serial entrepreneurs, in many ways, what I think they're really looking for is somebody who spent a whole bunch of years maybe trying to figure out what that very nuanced difference is between when you should pivot and when you should kind of stick to your original plan. I think in reality, the only way to become much better at it is to, and maybe this goes back to a previous part of what I talked about, is to jump in and get as much practice as possible. Unfortunately, and probably you've both seen this as well. What oftentimes happens with entrepreneurial stories is somebody may have been doing something for 10 or 20 years, and then all of a sudden they kind of jump in and they just say, that's it, I've wanted to be an entrepreneur for a while, and now I'm really going to do it. And they quit their job, and their very first set of mistakes are very, very costly ones. But to me, this goes back to that when you are, I think, for instance, like the reason that there are a lot of entrepreneurs in college and university is because they can afford to take risks at that point. And in some ways, if you have an ambition, or at least you want to figure out if you want to be an entrepreneur, find a way to get involved. Don't worry about what the stock option plan is. Odds are the first thing or two or four that you're going to choose is not really, that's not the dimension where you're trying to optimize or need to optimize. But find a way to put yourself in a situation where you are either at the head or at least in the room where important decisions are happening. So you can see over and over all of these different dynamics, all of these uncertainties that a leader of or a co-founding team of an organization needs to deal with. Because in some ways, unless you're somebody who has seen it, but also who takes the time to really try and figure out, well, what happened there? And yes, I agree with you that there should never be like one event which drives you away from a particular set of decisions. You need to see as many different variations of things as quickly as possible and be as deep a thinker as you can on what went right or wrong. And this probably leads to, in some ways, kind of another element of where psychology overlaps with entrepreneurship, which is I do think that particularly lovable entrepreneurs, particularly successful entrepreneurs, need to spend a lot of time really thinking about what motivates others. They need to be essentially kind of applied practitioners or applied individuals in terms of trying to understand the psychology of everybody around them. Of course, they're employees, because there are some employees that may be great people, but it's not just about whether they want to learn. It's also about what really motivates them at a deep level. It's also even important to understand the psychology of your customers, because oftentimes when we're doing a startup, we may say things like, "Oh, I am working with Meta or Apple or whatever," but the truth is you're not working with those things. You found 2 or 3 individuals that are champions of yours that have a particular set of problems, and they have a particular set of views about why they want to work with you, and you want to understand what their psychology is. What are they really trying to solve? So to me, I think trying to be a kind of a deep thinker who steps back, takes your own kind of ego out of the way, tries to take away as many cognitive biases and blinders that we all have as possible. And again, some of these things just take time and focusing. I think those are the ways that you become hopefully better. And look, it's true. Everyone makes the same mistake more than once. Let's call that an ideal. But you want to be on the faster side, on the better side of not making too many mistakes.
Beautiful. I can have this conversation for hours with you two, but it's the last minute here. So if your younger self, before starting your venture, your project, your company, were in the audience today, what would you tell your younger self in one sentence?
Just do it. Like, prototype your life, prototype your business, take action, learn. Don't make the same mistake twice. And find people to collaborate with. Find your supporters, find your collaborators, trust them, and try and build something cool together. That's what I'd say.
And I agree with all of that. And maybe one thing to mention is part of the reason why it is good to get out there and practice and get into various organizations is because that is also how you can find that amazing co-founder or two or three. Oftentimes finding that right person at some point when you're still kind of in your formative years is the thing that actually allows you down the road to really create something. And as probably many of you have noticed, oftentimes the most lovable entrepreneurs, they've been working with people that they had with them at the previous startup and the startup before that. Those tribes you develop, they're very, very sticky, and there's a shortcut, there's a shorthand to how you work together. There's a shortcut that trust allows you to have in a startup. So just get out there and meet people and do it, and yeah, don't make the same mistake twice to the extent possible.
And don't sell mouth.
Yeah. That's no other lessons from Breaking Bad need to be here.
Thank you so much, T2.
All right, thank you very much, everybody. So everybody, just do it. That's the great message today. Thank you.